times. Be with the times.
Cholo ko pyar, bada ko pranam, namaskar, sat sri akal, adab. What I really mean is love and blessings to all the younger ones and respect to our elders. Michelle Rowland, member from the Greenway, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Navneet.
It's a fourth term that you will be contesting the elections. And you start your campaign on the first day after you get elected. Where do you get all this energy from?
I enjoy doing this job. I relish being the member for Greenway, and I do think being a local member is really underestimated in terms of the job satisfaction that you get. You know, sometimes in politics, people are always looking for what ladder they can climb with their personal ambitions. I'm obviously very interested in the policy area that I have in communications, which is very relevant to your fine media enterprise as well. But ultimately, it's about people. You have to want to be around people. I learn something every day from the constituents whom I'm privileged to represent. So really, that's a lot of energy that I get just from being in the job. I also am very motivated by my family, who are very supportive. Particularly during campaign time. I think that if you haven't got a supportive spouse or partner and a supportive family, it's not the easiest job to do. So I'm very fortunate that I have that in spades from my family. So the energy is to really want to try and make a difference, and there is a real opportunity at this election to change the government, which changes the nation. And the concept of having a new government that's forward-looking, that's thinking about the future rather than being stuck in the past, is a real motivator for me as well.
With the elections being around the corner, what's your gut feeling?
I think it's going to be very close, and I've always said this is going to be close. I don't think anyone should think that this is somehow going to be a landslide win for one party over another. I think there's going to be very different results in different areas of Australia, be it Queensland and even different parts of Queensland, for example, in different parts of New South Wales, the regions and the metropolitan areas. So I don't think that there is going to be anything uniform about this election. Anything can happen, and we've only got a couple of days literally to go in what's been a 3-year campaign. And anything can happen in that time.
I love it when you say 3 years campaign. That means the day you won the elections last time.
It is, and I think these days, Navneet, people expect you to be on your A game as soon as you get elected. I think that's a good thing. With the rise of different forms of media as well, including social media, people are much more able to see what their member is doing from day to day. And I receive comments in person and online all the time about what I'm doing, how people can get involved in different initiatives that I might have outside of pure politics. So I think there's an expectation that you are there. You're not just there at election times. And people notice when you just pop up at election times. Pre-poll is open at the moment, and the number of people I hear saying, to other candidates, I never see you, I don't know who you are. I think it counts for something to be out there in the community all the time.
Over the time, the South Asian community has developed quite a bit of affinity to yourself. I think they feel comfortable and regard you as one of them. What do you think are the reasons this has happened? You also appear to be comfortable with the South Asian community as well. So what's your take on that?
I'm actually very interested in how Australian relations with different parts of South Asia have developed, and I've particularly become interested in that in an economic sense. Obviously I'm very interested in people's cultural backgrounds simply because I find that to be quite stimulating, to know that we are a multicultural country, and knowing what makes people tick is it's quite fascinating. But beyond that, I've really started to think, particularly in the last term, about how the relationships have evolved between our countries, which is why I'm very excited by the various announcements Labor's made in the future Asia space. Of course, it's very important for us to have links, being democratic nations, being nations that have shared history, common values, but also where do we go from here? I think it's been particularly interesting to see the Varghese report, for example, talking about where we go from here with our relationship with India, and the fact that we've been on the cusp of a very significant economic relationship for too long. I think it's time to examine where we go from here, but also to implement that. And also for a number of people of South Asian background who live in the Pacific, for example, including Fiji, that relationship has evolved tremendously over the past couple of years. And again, that should be an economic relationship. But also there's some really important policies in that area, including climate change, which Pacific nations are very mindful of and want to see action on. Australia needs to step up and be a leader in the Pacific. And I think for too long we have sat back, observed the build-up of power of other countries, but we have not done enough to step up and take our role as thought leaders, as economic leaders, and as partners in the Pacific. And I really want to see that change. And I'm very stimulated by the comments that people make to me and their points of view about how Australia can do that. It's a fascinating thing to observe. And I guess the last thing is, above all else, it doesn't matter what background you come from. If you come to Australia to make a new life and you choose to become an Australian, you make the choice to be Australian, the overriding goal is I want my children to have better life and better opportunities than I had myself, which is why I think we've seen so many people like your good self and the partners with whom you work really having that entrepreneurialism, not just in spirit, but in action. And I take my hat off to you, and I learn a lot from you.
Oh, thank you so much. I understand that you live in Glenwood, very close to the Sikh temple in Pakli, what we say is Gurdwara Sahib in Glenwood. For a long term, you've been living there. Before even you were a politician, you have been living in there. Do you think that has made a difference in appreciation from the community as well?
I think it has, but I think moreover, the appreciation is from myself and getting to know really sort of at its infancy when we built our first house in Glenwood. It was at a time when new parts of the estate were still being opened up, and it's changed a lot since then. I still have people even today on pre-poll. I had a young bloke come up to me and say, I first met you when I was 5 years old, when you were on the local council and you came to the opening of something. So it's sort of like I've seen the suburb, but people have also seen me growing up. And it provides that sort of, I think, a family feel. And I think the fact that Greenway is a very diverse electorate, but Glenwood is a very diverse suburb. And there are many diverse suburbs in the electorate. It really made me appreciate, for example, when new parts of Riverston and Schofields were being developed, I was excited to see what these new areas would bring. Once upon a time, speaking quite frankly, when politicians would see these new suburbs spring up, they would assume, they'll never vote Labor, they won't be interested in politics. But I made a very conscious decision to really engage with people who are moving into the area, and I found three fascinating things. Firstly, they have come from every part of the world, these new residents who are moving in. Every part of the world, every religion, every background. Secondly, they've come from every part of Sydney. There are people who've moved into these new suburbs who have lived everywhere from the northern beaches to down the road in Blacktown. So real diversity there. And the third thing is their needs are very similar. Yes, they are delighted to have had the opportunity to have a new home in a new suburb, but they are very concerned about the infrastructure that goes with it. And when I talk infrastructure, I don't just mean road and transport. It's also what we sometimes call soft infrastructure, like the playgrounds, the elements that make quality of life enjoyable for people. So it's been fascinating to observe that. And I hope we don't make the same mistakes that we have had in some planning. Anyone in Glenwood will tell you the most frustrating thing would have to be the traffic congestion.
Absolutely.
There's only, I think, 2 or 3 points to get out on one side of Glenwood and equal on the other side. So I don't think that if you were going to plan a suburb again, you wouldn't plan it like you did Glenwood. You know, great place to live, but you wouldn't plan it for the traffic. So there's lots of learnings to be had there.
As a lawyer in the profession, before you got into politics, you did some of the pro bono cases for the domestic violence victims as well. And you've taken the active role with the Labour Party on domestic violence as well. What made you to go in this particular direction?
Well, a couple of years into my time as a lawyer, we actually were required to do pro bono work, and I wondered, you know, what sort of work would I be interested in? And I never went to court. The kind of law that I did didn't require me to go to court, and so I was encouraged to do some pro bono support work that would take me to court, and I ended up being on the women's domestic violence roster at the Downing Centre. And that was literally the only time I would go to court, sort of sometimes on a weekly basis, sometimes on a fortnightly basis. So I enjoyed that aspect of seeing how the court worked. Of course, I didn't enjoy a lot of the particulars of the cases I was dealing with. But I tell you what, doing that and being part of a group of people who lobbied very hard to have change in this area, we actually managed to make that court system far more accessible for women. Back then, you were literally taking instructions on the steps of the court because there wasn't a safe room, there wasn't an area for you to work in, and it took lobbying at a state level for us to get those sorts of facilities. So predominantly women who were the victims in these instances could have somewhere that they could feel safe. So I managed to see how you could actually make a difference to the court experience of women. There's still such a long way to go. There's a long way to go in terms of awareness. There's a long way to go in terms of breaking down many of the taboos that exist amongst different cultures. But it's not just a cultural thing. I think what a lot of people fail to understand is that, you know, there's a woman a week who dies at the hands of someone with whom they had a relationship, and often an intimate relationship. That's a woman a week on average. It's completely unacceptable, and too often it's women whom you wouldn't expect. And I got to see women who had become victims at the hands of partners. And a lot of the time, these were professional women who said, I never thought this would happen to me. You know, I never thought it would happen to me.
Even the working women going out
Exactly.
on a regular basis.
Exactly. So it can happen to anyone. And I think that we need those support services in place so that it's not treated as something that should be swept under the carpet. Of course, it is a very stressful time for people going through this. But, you know, even it wasn't that long ago that we had that terrible instance in Glenwood of a woman who was very involved in the life of the Gurdwara. And you know, a lovely, lovely woman with children before victim in her home. That shouldn't be happening in our community. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to have that awareness and be ready to speak out.
Yeah, I normally say domestic violence is a disease that needs to be eradicated.
It certainly is.
From the roots.
You're absolutely right.
You know, probably your voters in your constituency would like to know more. What's on your wish list?
On my wish list for the next term, I think we need a better and NBN that is a future-proof national broadband network.
And
it's
a
one of
lot
the
has been spent on that.
a lot has been spent on that, but we've got a network that cost over $50 billion, but is 4 years late and costs more and does less. So it's not the value for money that taxpayers expect. You know, children like yours and mine, they are digital natives now. They expect there to be everything from Wi-Fi accessibility everywhere they go. They expect instant access. They consume television, not by the television program guide. They consume when they want, content when they want. And with the rise of new technologies like 5G, mobile technologies on the horizon, we want to make sure that, and we should want to make sure as a society that all of us have that equality of access to the world's best. I want to see jobs of the future being enhanced and people being prepared to take those jobs. I think about 10 years ago, the job of a data analyst was seen as something quite mundane. Now it is integral to everything we do. It's integral to government, to infrastructure planning, to corporations like banks and insurers. Those kinds of jobs, we need to ensure that we're preparing young people to be able to do those. And I guess the other one is to enhance, what I call the quality of life for our society. One of the biggest complaints that I get from people, one of the biggest concerns they have, is that everything seems to be going up except their wages. Job insecurity and underemployment is huge. I'm sure you've seen this yourself. People who don't know whether they're going to get shift work from one week to the next, they can't plan, they can't pay their bills. So whilst they are not categorised as unemployed, the nature of their work means that they don't have that certainty. They can't plan for the future. We shouldn't have a society where people are worried about that. We should have a society where people know that they are well equipped for jobs where they are appropriately paid, and jobs in which they have some security.
Going away from the politics, taking you back to your childhood memory lane. Any of the memory that you want to relive?
I remember we were a family of
what we had is very different.
It's very different. Huh? It's very different. I mean, we were a family of modest means. I didn't go on an aeroplane until I was a teenager, so we went on a lot of holidays in being driven by Dad in the car, and sometimes we would just go. The holidays would be spent going for long drives, to the country. So I remember, being in this small car, being shoved in the middle because I was the youngest. Apparently, I don't remember any of it, but apparently when I was a toddler, seatbelts weren't compulsory back then, and we drove as a family. We drove from Sydney to Brisbane, and I was sitting on my poor mother's lap the whole time. There was no such thing as baby seats being compulsory back then. So I remember a lot of those holidays.
Scared of anything in life?
I think all my fears are about my kids. When I think about the worst thing that could happen, it always involves my kids not being secure, my kids being hurt. So I think, as you would well know, parenthood changes you.
Absolutely.
You stop worrying about yourself. I'm not worried about myself. Sometimes you have irrational thoughts, like when I'm pushing my littlest one in her pram and I see a dog and I think, well, what happens if that dog instinctively you think, well, I would just cover my child. Things start to make a lot more sense when you become a parent.
What would you describe the new parental visa policy in the few words that would be there from the Labor side?
I think it will be, it's a long time coming, and it's the right approach. I think it's the right approach because we need to recognise that parents who come to this country, they come here to make a contribution as well. And I see this as I go around, door knocking in Glenwood, often during the day where a lot of families have two parents who need to work. It's not a luxury, they need to work. And having their parents with the opportunity to come to this country, to provide assistance to their families, these are the same parents who will go and spend money in the community, they will shop, they will contribute, they will make a difference in the lives of their children and their grandchildren. So I think it is a positive thing for Australia to have that visa. And it's one that I think the community has wanted for a long time, and the economic case has been made for it as well.
The Labor policy on negative gearing has been taking Labor a little backwards in terms of voters thinking about it. When on roads and streets we talk with the people, what do you like about Party A, Party B, Party C? And when it comes to Labor Party, negative gearing is something which is on people's mind on top. The Labor is going to bring that policy which will be hurting a lot of investors in that. So do you have anything to justify that?
I think there's been a lot of misinformation about the policy out there. So for a start, I'll point out that Labor introduced this policy more than 3 years ago. So it's been out there for some time to be socialised, but it's interesting that it's only now starting to get the level of attention that it has. I think there's 2 points about the policy that need to be borne in mind. Firstly, anyone who has existing negative gearing or capital gains tax arrangements, they will be unchanged, completely unchanged. And you will still be able to negatively gear in future after the policy is implemented, but you can do that on new housing, so new housing stock. Now this is designed for 2 things. Firstly, to incentivise that level of housing stock, but also to ensure that for the limited housing that is available, and we know that housing is very much, and pricing is very much a matter of supply and demand, we don't have investors who have multiple properties pushing new people out of the market. You know, it is a great concern that you hear different things from different parts of the society. And one of the biggest things I hear from young people is people who have given up on the notion of ever being able to own their own home. Now, I don't think that that's the kind of Australia we want to have, but we want to ensure that we have the right balance between existing negative gearing, which is going on, which will all be grandfathered and not be touched. I think that's a very important point that people have been missing in some parts of the policy, but also that we incentivise those new properties to be developed.
I do understand elections being around the corner. You have a very, very tight schedule, but still you gave us an opportunity to have a chat with you. Thank you so much. And on behalf of Fiji Times and my video director, Warren Tiwari, once again, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure as always, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.